Conservation Commission. Sorry for the delay. We were waiting for a quorum, but now we have one, so we can proceed. So, first on the agenda is the Open Public Meetings Act. This meeting has been advertised in the Star Ledger, the Montclair Times, and the Newark Herald, and also a notice is posted in Town Hall. Tonight we will be streamed live on Channel 34, and you will also be able to watch this on what's that called? YouTube. So thank you for coming tonight. Again, my apologies for our brief delay in beginning. Mr. Petto, would you please?
Sure. Roll call. Chair Bennett?
Here.
Vice Chair Hyman?
Present.
Mr. Greenbaum is excused at this time. Mr. Rooney is en route. He's on his way. We should see him shortly. Ms. Kane-Leedy?
Here.
Mr. Reimnitz?
Here.
And Mr. Karasik?
Here.
Okay, following our agenda, and this is our first meeting of 2020, the nominations of officers. Do I have any nominations for chair?
I nominate Kathleen Bennett.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Jason Heinlein.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. How about recording secretary? We have
Nominate Mr. Petto.
a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And our attorney, Mr.
I don't think we
Karasik?
don't vote on that.
Okay.
No, it's
He's just
assistant
listed.
secretary.
All right.
Assistant secretary.
No, Assistant Secretary is what's
Yeah.
listed.
Assistant secretary?
Yes, which
Who's
Ms.
it?
Talley is.
Yeah.
But,
I nominate Janice Talley.
Second?
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Graham has also given us a list of the committee reports for 2020, which were in the packet. And it would also be noted that under the revisions committee, we will continue the subcommittee for the amendment of the districting in the ordinance. So it's an ordinance.
The amendment process for the historic preservation. Okay.
Yes. So add that to the list that Graham has given us in our packet. And I'm going to move the minutes next, just to get it out of the way. So if everyone, have you all been able to, had a chance to read our minutes? Are there any changes or? If not, I would like to make one note on page 3, under new business, the referral from the Board of Adjustment, application 2666. Number 1, I would like to see the first part of the sentence struck, and for it to say rehabilitation of this property for its historic, albeit expanded use, appears to be minimal to the building's distinctive materials. So to take out use will require changes. Does anyone have a problem with that? Let it be noted that Mr. Rooney has arrived. Mr. Rooney, did you get a chance to look at the minutes? Do you have any? Do you have
online, but
any comments?
no.
Okay, and this will be sent to does the planning board hear?
The Zoning Board of Adjustment will hear this application on Wednesday, January 15th.
Is anyone available to go to that meeting on January 15th? I'm not available. You'll be out of town. Will you be there, available, Mr. Rooney?
Let me see.
Okay.
Apparently I am available.
Great. So Mr. Rooney will be there. And then the Label Street, the old business, when does that go to the
That was
zoning-
approved at the December 18th
It
zoning
was,
board meeting.
it was approved. Okay, great.
With substantial modifications, correct?
There were conditions of the approval, and
It-
some variances were not granted, correct? But
So will it be able to come back to us since it's a very different proposal?
as part of, I believe it's condition 10, that's in the minutes, the applicant is to return to present the final as-approved plan to the board.
But we don't have any indication when that will be.
That's at the applicant's discretion.
Okay. Okay, so may I have a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
A motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have
Okay.
abstain.
Okay, moving on. Okay, so we are all here tonight for the public hearing, the second public hearing, in fact, for the nomination of the Oakcroft Landmark District and the nomination of the Wheeler Street Landmark District. Before we begin public comment, I would like to ask people that would like to address, come up to the podium. If you've spoken last time or last time at the first public comment hearing, please allow people that haven't spoken to speak now. We're going to keep this to a 3-minute, hard 3 minutes. So if I ask you to sit down, please do, because we've had a lot of feedback, and we know what people's opinions are, more or less. What I would like to do before we begin is read a statement that I wrote concerning this. So, the Montclair Historic Preservation Commission has listened to your remarks and concerns about the potential residential districts of Oakcroft and Wheeler. In our enthusiasm to administer our mission of promoting and celebrating our architectural heritage, perhaps we acted a little too quickly. Many of the concerns were about the details, which doors, windows, siding, shingles, HVACs, or solar panels were appropriate for the neighborhoods. These details would be covered in the Historic Design Guidelines, which currently addresses the existing districts, which are all commercial with the exception of Pine Street Historic District, which has a few residences. We are working to amend the design guidelines to include residential districts. Additionally, in the last 2 months, we started the process of amending the Historic Preservation Ordinance of the township, and these things will be specifically addressed, and we really want to streamline the process or even eliminate some things from full review, and we thinking that it would go into the, which committee?
We have a special
An ordinance amendment
review
subcommittee.
Right, Amendment Review
that
Committee.
We've carried into
Into
this
the- okay.
2020 term.
And of course, we welcome the community's input into this process, as we welcome the community's input into this process all along. Others were concerned about the economic impact of residential districting. These guidelines are designed to help you best maintain the architectural and historic character of your home, meaning the design guidelines, rather than to impose egregious or costly restrictions. You would have to have projects approved by the HPC if you were in the local district, of course, as you do now. The primary concern of the HPC is that you repair rather than replace historic elements of your home wherever possible. Presently, both Mr. Graham Petto, Assistant Planner of the Montclair Times, of the Montclair HPC, and Thomas Conley, the HPC consultant, meet with prospective applicants to discuss changes or the creation of buildings within historic districts. We think of this as a free design service, and it really is. Some projects have been changed really for the better. Some states offer tax credit programs which are available to residential property owners. At least 34 states currently offer their own historic tax credit program. The New Jersey Historic Tax Incentive was passed by the New Jersey legislature in 2011, but was subsequently vetoed by former Governor Chris Christie. Eligible projects would have included those listed individually or contributing to listed districts on state or national registers, and would have funded up to 25% of qualified costs for work performed. This bill was reintroduced in 2018 and now sits on Governor Murphy's desk. Hopefully, it will be signed into law in the near future. We added an additional information session in addition to the 2 mandated public hearings, this being the second. We extended the letter submission deadline. We were listening. So at that, I would invite people who would like to come up and address the commission. If you come up to the podium, please sign in with your email address. And why don't we start with the Oakcroft section, if anyone's here to speak about Oakcroft, if you haven't spoken in the last meeting.
Hi, my name is Karma Lockman. I'm on Walnut Street, and I guess this is your first meeting in the new year, correct?
Yes.
So I attended a couple of the historic district meetings, and I must admit I was surprised at the, I would almost say venom at times that you received as volunteers on this commission. And I just wanted to say I thank you for your service. I think that you bring a lot of passion, a lot of knowledge, a lot of hours spent, and I don't believe that you should be criticized. We're seeing that a little bit too much in our town recently. So I just want to commend you for your service, and thank you for your service, and hope that you have a good year.
Thank you.
Hi, Lisa Ann Renner, Godfrey Road. I also wanted to thank both the HPC board, who are all volunteers and spent a lot of hours on this, and particularly Graham Petto of the township staff, who I know spent a lot of hours on this too. This was a major undertaking. You were plowing new ground, and I think it was worthy ground to plow. And even though we did not wind up with a district or 2 districts, we do have a great new base of information to build on later and to go forward with in the future, and I think that's definitely a plus, so thank you.
Okay. Anyone else from Oakcroft? No. Okay. How about Wheeler Street? Nomination of Wheeler Street Landmark District. Would anyone like to speak to the districts in general?
So my name is William Newman. I'm here to speak on behalf of Preservation New Jersey on the benefits of historic districts. I am not a resident of your fine township. However, I do have a lot of experience as far as historic preservation throughout the state of New Jersey. And some of the things that I find that we see in districts that are designated really are benefits. I don't really see too many negatives on this at all. I will actually also leave with this commission a study in South Carolina that actually very factually demonstrate economic and cultural benefits for many towns in that state. We are also, Preservation New Jersey is a statewide advocacy program. We receive nothing from the government. We are not government controlled in any way, shape, or form. We're all just volunteer members. We are actually also advocating for the historic tax credit in New Jersey. We are one of the last few states that do not have a historic preservation tax credit. We think that could be very beneficial for homeowners in historic districts. Some of the advantages that I would just like to outline are, this is one of the ways to protect investments in historic properties, and that encourages people to buy and rehabilitate properties because they know their investment is protected over time. Appreciate at greater values, greater rates on the local market overall, meaning historic districts are less vulnerable to market risks, market volatility, interest rate fluctuations, and economic downturn. This is consistent throughout the entire country. It's not just New Jersey. It's not just places that have good, viable economies. It encourages better design and, quality of workmanship in the improvement of a neighborhood, in the improvement of a district. It also gives a greater sense of cohesiveness and thus greater public appeal. It helps the environment by retaining use of existing assets. You forego the disruption and destruction through new construction, meaning when something gets demolished and replaced by something else, that is an upheaval in districts. And having a historic district has that cohesiveness, has ways to protect the cohesiveness of districts. It also eliminates landfill. I'm from Rutherford, and we used to drag our houses down to the Meadowlands and bury them down there. Of course, we don't do that anymore, and thankfully, historic districts are somewhat protected from that also. It supports education and civic enlightenment. It also supports cultural cohesiveness, which is important in our neighborhoods now. Our neighborhoods not only are architecturally significant, historically important, but they are culturally important too. There are so many different ways that they boost the economy. A lot of it is even possibly through tourism. And you can imagine historic districts as tourists. Yeah, more and more tourism is about historic preservation and about the local stories. And districts demonstrate that. They demonstrate the past, the future, and tells that the future will be around, or the past will be around in the future. I could go on for a lot longer, but I will tell you that I think that the benefits are terrific. I really do hope that you will continue to consider historic districts, because they are valuable ways to do preservation of areas that are really cohesive, that really are valuable socially, economically, and culturally to the area. And so I thank you for allowing me to arise and speak to this as benefits.
Thank you. Wait, just a second. I said if there were people that were here that didn't speak before, please come up. We didn't know how many people were going to be here. But now, if you would like to speak, keep it to 3 minutes. And please, Ilmar, you were, I think, first. Thank you.
I wanted to echo the previous two speakers in thanking the HPC for its time and attention and effort to introduce the two historic districts. I'm disappointed at the outcome, but hopeful that in the future that our community's desire to protect our heritage, history, and significant public landmarks can be reconciled with a community-friendly approach towards doing that, in light of all the attention being paid still almost a year later to two recent prominent teardowns in town and the continuing crusade and public opposition against that. So I'm hoping we can find a reasonable, workable solution towards maintaining the character of our communities and preventing future instances of that from happening. I'm also a long-time town board volunteer, so I know myself from firsthand experience how much time, effort, and dedication is required. So I commend all of you for the time that you are volunteering on the board. I just mainly wanted to acknowledge that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carol Farron, 7 Princeton Place, legally skilled. I'll be less than a minute. And while I've been very much the adversary, I do commend the board for the letter coming out, because it's a learning process, and we all learn no matter how old we get with the shortcomings of what we may do. I'm only getting up now because I said enough the last time I've written my letter, but as a protocol legally, I move to strike the testimony of the gentleman sitting there as having no interest in this hearing. He doesn't live in this town. He has no economic detriment that he's threatened with.
Excuse me, may I ask Mr. Karasik to comment on that?
I mean, the board can take the statements from anyone who comes up here, as long as they're civil, basically. We don't have to, someone doesn't have to live in Montclair, there's no requirement, and their interest, to the extent that they have one, will go to the weight, so to speak, of what they say. I mean, if you live in the district, so people are going to pay attention to you. This gentleman probably doesn't live here, doesn't live in the district, so people will listen to him for what he has to say, and
Excuse
I don't
us.
think, but the commissions doesn't have to exclude him, and we don't strike in a sense because he didn't provide any factual testimony either under oath or not under oath, so there's no need to strike what he had to say from the record.
Well, I'm going by legal evidence and legal
Well, I
procedure.
appreciate that in court it's
I'm going
different.
to finish with what I'm
Okay.
going to say. He doesn't live here, he's in Rutherford, and he's shown no credentials. And what he said is, in the legal jargon, a net opinion. A net opinion means it's nothing more than his opinion, not substantiated, no warning to anybody here to cross-examine him as to what he's relying upon. I've made my point, I've made my record.
Would anyone else like to address the commission? Okay, well, the public,
We're going to close the public
yeah,
comment.
we close the public comment now, and we'll be open for deliberation.
Well, now, did you want to make your motion?
Oh, right, do you have the, hold on, I was looking for the letter. So in the letter that I wrote out, I sent out to all the property owners in the two districts, was that after consideration of the protest opposition, I will offer a motion at the meeting to my fellow commissioners to withdraw the pending nominations before the commission and recommend that Oakcroft and Wheeler areas not be designated. So,
You need a second.
we need a second for that, or?
Yeah, you need a second.
Right.
I second that.
Can I just ask a question? Is that without prejudice in the future, should a time come that there was more support?
I mean, if we withdraw this motion to, or I guess there was a motion originally to make these districts, to investigate these districts. So if you're withdrawing that motion, it can be raised again sometime in the future if the process, you want to restart the process.
I'd like to say something now that we're in the deliberations portion of this motion. And I first want to start off by thanking Graham for his efforts in ushering this through. I think he's done a yeoman's job of getting the notices out, being not so much the spokesperson, but the conduit for the community to raise their concerns. I think he's done a fantastic job of making sure the information is publicly available. I work with a lot of municipalities and cities, and I've looked at the Montclair website, and it is light years beyond what most municipalities have in terms of publicly accessible information, timely information for a community of this size. Most of the time you see things like this in larger municipalities. So I'd like to commend Graham on his efforts in getting this out and really just compiling all this information so that we could get the feedback, so that the community could have their voices heard, and this could proceed in an orderly fashion. I did listen to, I wasn't here on the December 10th meeting, but I did watch the entirety of the public hearing on these two nominations, and I noticed a lot of concerns from the community about this process and about basically uncertainty and a lack of transparency. And I just want to comment that the process that was followed is not an ad hoc process by this commission. This was the process that was basically delegated to us by the Historic Preservation Ordinance. We followed that process, and under that process, we're not actually the deciding body. So there were a lot of arguments that were made relating to property values and things like that, about property rights and the policy behind regulations. That's really not our purview. What our purview is under the ordinance is specifically spelled out. Our role as the Historic Preservation Commission is to recommend districts for nomination. Once nominated as a historic district, it's a zoning overlay. And to create a zoning overlay, it's basically it's just like another zoning regulation. It's the purview of the council. So regardless of what happens here, we could decide to recommend something. It goes to the town council. The town council has to refer it to the planning board, and then the planning board makes its recommendations to the council, who actually vote whether to approve or not to approve. So this isn't the be-all, end-all of the process. There are plenty of opportunities for various arguments to be made to the decision makers, and they're much broader than what we have purview over here. And they are democratically accountable elected officials making that ultimate decision. With that being said, the criteria that we are supposed to work off of is set forth in section 347-135 of the Historic Preservation Ordinance in the Town Code, and it states that the criteria for designation is that the Commission shall consider as worthy of designation those buildings, structures, objects, sites, and districts that have integrity of location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association, and that meet one or more of the following criteria. 1, they're associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. They are associated with the lives of persons significant in our past. They embody distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction that represents the work of a master, that possesses high artistic value, or that represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. 4, they've yielded or may be likely to yield information important to prehistory or history. 5, they are otherwise of particular historic significance to the Township of Montclair by reflecting or exemplifying the broad culture, political, economic, or social history of the nation, state, region, or community. So those are the factors that I'm constrained to work off of, and the Commission as a whole is constrained to work off of. And the reports prepared by Connolly and Hickey were crafted to address those concerns. And while I'm still on the fence on the merits of designations of the historic district, I don't think the direction that these hearings have gone and what I've heard so far, in my opinion, warrant short-circuiting the process at this point. As Chair Bennett indicated, we've already started the process of looking to amend the Historic Preservation Ordinance, which provides the standards and review criteria for these applications so that we can specifically integrate residential districts. For example, we've already discussed issues like solar panels, renovations, and things like that, that would be appropriate to either exempt from review or move to the minor applications section, which is, again, it's all spelled out in the ordinance. So these aren't arbitrary standards. They aren't subjective. They aren't just our opinion. They're set forth in the code just like any other zoning ordinance, which we're all subject to. This isn't something out of the blue. Your property rights are already constrained. They're already heavily regulated. This is just another layer that I think we need to consider on the merits. And with that being said, I think I'm inclined to vote against withdrawing the application. And if that motion were to fail, I would propose another motion to table this for 6 months so that we can address the ordinance amendment process first, so that the residents have a clear picture of what a historic district designation would actually look like.
You may want to open public comment again if this is the direction you go.
Well, what we could do is we could,
Deliberation?
this is deliberations, so if there's another motion, there can be another set of public comments on that motion. So right now, public comment is closed on this motion. But that's my thought, if anyone has any other comments or thoughts.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, Jason. I think the problem here is, part of our role here as the Historic Preservation Commission is to educate and bring the community along, and I don't think we did a very good job of that in this case. And that's evidenced by a lot of people not being happy with the whole process and feeling like they're being, stepped on in many different ways. So I think my own opinion is that based on that, I would tend to support Kathleen's position and learn from it and do a better job the next time around. So.
And that's a fair point. What I'm trying to do is be pragmatic, because it is a substantial cost to renotice hearings. But if it's tabled, if it's carried, we have a date certain. We don't have to go through that process of spending taxpayer money to renotice if this were to come up again. If after the amendment process of the ordinance is completed within that time, and it's not, there still isn't the community support, we can address it at that June meeting.
So first of all, I'm sorry I'm joining you late. I just came from Montclair High School, where my son made a wonderful presentation. So, but I'm glad to be part of this. This has been a very provocative event, this whole discussion of effectively having some oversight over private property rights. I think all of us heard the feedback from the community. Not all of us necessarily agreed or believed that the reaction was necessarily commensurate with the actual effects of a designation. I can personally say that, the intentions of the designation are truly benevolent from the point of view of trying to do something to allow our town to grow and to evolve in a responsible way. There's always the challenge of at what point is there overreach over private property rights, and this is obviously a very gray area, but it should be understood. I hope, if I can speak for my fellow commissioners, I want everybody to believe that the intentions are not to say no. The intentions are to say yes and to help make it better, and to be advisors and almost an architectural sounding board for those who might not have the resources to engage the architectural services of a certain standard. You get the free benefit. There is a positive to it. The other positive in this process that I can share is I took a lot of time to spend walking the Wheeler Street district with a resident and a property owner in the district, and I also spent a significant amount of time in Oakcroft, and both were incredibly educational for me. I'm astounded and excited by what I see in Wheeler Street. I was just not aware of how the area has really, it's evolving in a very nice way, aesthetically in many cases. But I think that the issue is tricky when it comes to private residences. I can understand. On a personal level, my priority tends to be focused on the commercial districts, where the public good is directly affected by the whole community, not just the individual neighbors. However, there is a benefit to this type of designation, especially in areas that have a consistency and have a certain character that deserves to be recognized and retained. But I do think that if there is such, I think a private property owner, a residential owner, should have the right to ultimately supersede in some form through some process if their right should not be ultimately impinged upon at a certain point. But I do think there is a benefit to having a certain overlay of oversight to guide and shape and help in a positive way. But I do think, and this is something we need to discuss amongst ourselves, there needs to be a mechanism of recourse so that people are not ultimately feeling that their rights are impinged upon excessively. So we all are working through this. This is our first effort at official designation as a body. Again, I think our commercial districts deserve a tremendous degree of our shared attention. I think that's an area that is very much under siege. But this is an important exercise of communication between neighbors. We are your neighbors, and we want to achieve the best outcome for everybody. And the mechanisms within our purview, as explained by my colleague, are limited. But this is one mechanism where we can be of assistance in helping preserve a certain standard of quality and coherence to a particular community where it is deserved. And that's the gray area that we have to sort through, and your feedback is certainly very helpful.
Thank you. Ms. Kane,
Well, I'm interested in what Jason had to say about tabling it for a little while. But I think, could it be something that goes longer than 6 months, or is there a?
Sure.
Yeah. I think it might be something to consider to keep it open for a year as we do some more survey work and understanding and work on the ordinance.
We could determine the time frame?
I'm going to ask Ira.
I'm sorry, I was just.
That's okay.
You were asking about keeping it open?
Yeah, in terms of tabling this nomination, are we limited to the calendar year? I mean, my
I don't think you're limited to the calendar year, but I think that you can't, if you're going to table it, you're going to end up having to renotice everybody again anyway. So, and as whether or not the motion's withdrawn, as Kathleen's motion is, or even the 6-month tabling that you suggested, or a year tabling, I think that once you get past, once you want to redo this, if you ever want to come back to it, you're going to have to start essentially over again. I imagine you can use the study that was done of the properties, but you're going to have to renotice everybody and advise them that you're really starting this up again. So I don't think there's necessarily any benefit to tabling it as opposed to just withdrawing the proposal to make a recommendation.
But there's no restriction if we do change the ordinance and work on amending the design guidelines, if we could do that with, in the year, that we could reopen it.
Well, just because my thought is, this is the second meeting, and we came in to the December 10th meeting knowing we were going to have a second meeting, and we didn't renotice it then. It was just carried.
Well, no, but you noticed it at the meeting. At the meeting, you announced that this meeting was going to take place.
Yeah, and that's my thought.
And it was noticed to it. So if you're saying, can I, in 6 months or a year from now, send out a notice and saying, okay, we're following up on our previous work, and we're going to consider whether to vote on, is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying at this meeting, we close the public session and say we're going to reopen it at the June whatever meeting of this year. So it's publicly noticed, it's carried.
Well, listen, from a legal perspective, if you could say tonight, well, we're not going to vote tonight, we're going to think about it, come back in 2 meetings and vote on it. You could do that. Mm-hmm. But that's assuming that you just don't do anything tonight. Mm-hmm. But if you have approve the chair's motion, then you're done with this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So,
But
52% of all the people in the districts, in both districts said no.
No, I think they know.
One person said yes.
No, I think the commission knows how the people feel, and we have these letters. We have all the protests and everything.
This is the people.
Excuse me, the public comment, you've made your opinion known before. Thank you.
I think the commission, I'm just trying to explain to the commission what options they might have. So, I think, you can decide how you want to do it. You may want to, one thing you could do is not do anything and think about whether you want to just dismiss the whole thing or continue it in the future, or you can act tonight. I think that, well, I'm not going to talk about fairness or anything, I'm just giving you a legal opinion.
Yeah.
But yes, give us the options.
And my thought is, if the idea is we're to use this as a learning experience, we're going to get more public feedback and potentially come back to it, then I don't know if withdrawing and renoticing in the near future is the right idea. I'd rather just table it. But if we're done with this, if that's the thought, then withdraw it. But I've heard conflicting things, and my thought is, based on what I've heard, is I think it needs to be readdressed, considering the open questions that are answerable.
Well, if you're not ready to terminate this, then you don't have to, there's no obligation to.
I don't know.
To vote to terminate.
My sense of this, I'll just jump in, and I understand sort of the process and the legalities and so on, but based on everything I've heard, it's going to be a lot of wasted energy on our part. I really think so. That where we could spend our efforts, our volunteer efforts, better learning from this experience and applying it someplace else. We can always come back to it, as I understand it, and in some other fashion. So I would tend to, well, that's what I have to say about it.
Mr. Rooney.
Yeah, I think that we should vote on this and terminate it.
Made a motion.
Yeah.
And I seconded it.
So whenever, when you're ready to when you're ready to close it and call a vote, you can call a vote.
Okay, so why don't we call a vote then? So.
Does anyone else?
Oh,
have
yeah,
anything to say?
everybody else? Any other?
Everybody's been good.
Okay.
Okay, so this is regarding Ms. Bennett's motion to withdraw the pending nomination before the commission. And this is, just to clarify, this is a concurrent motion for both districts,
No.
correct? Or is this just
yes.
So this is for both Oakcroft and Wheeler? Okay. So in favor of the motion means you support the withdrawal, against, you're in opposition. Mr. Reimnitz?
Yes.
Ms. Kane-Levy?
Yes.
Mr. Rooney?
Yes.
Mr. Greenbaum?
Yes.
Mr. Hyman?
Yes.
Ms. Bennett?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay. So, motion is passed. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Please know that we're a very dedicated and hardworking group, and historic preservation does not end tonight. It will go forward. So keep your eyes and ears open, and we invite you to come to our meetings the fourth Thursday of every month. You will see us in action. You will see how serious we are. You will see the expertise on our board. And we do thank you for your input, and we will be asking you again, especially as we work through the challenges that we know exist in our HP ordinance and also in the design guidelines. So, thank you. Okay. So the meeting.
No, there's the public comment.
All right.
And then adjournment.
Okay.
I
So
would say that's-
number 7 on our.
Just wait for the people to clear out. Yes, and it can be on any topic. So,
Wow.
but do you want to go?
No. All right, next on our agenda is public comment. If anyone would like to address the commission, it can be, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the districts. It can be on any topic. Again, I would ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Just identify yourself, Mr. Scott.
Good evening, William Scott, 23 Cedar Avenue. I wasn't at the past council meeting, but I understand there's a grant for...
Excuse...
We can just wait till people who are leaving, they can go. Mr. Scott, if you want to take a seat and let it quiet down.
Well, we should,
or
if we could just have all outside conversation move into the hallway. We have someone addressing the commission up here. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I think we can hear you now.
Okay. As I started to say, I wasn't at the past council conference meeting, but I understand there was a discussion item for another grant being submitted to the township for the...
No, the grant's already been received.
Okay.
So no. Sorry, I was at Monday's council meeting. So to clarify, the council considered the resolution for the commission to submit an application for the next 2020 round of the Certified Local Government Grant and Aid application. The commission will be making an application to amend the residential design guidelines as they discussed here.
Okay.
So that grant application is to seek a historic preservation consulting services to go through the existing design guidelines and craft additional supplementation to residential design guidelines.
And that's what I was trying to get some clarification. It's not
Yes.
for another...
It is not for another survey.
Exactly. Okay, that's pretty much what I was interested in.
Yeah, the commission subcommittee met, and that was the decision to move forward with this grant application this year. And it will also include an outreach component, a booklet or pamphlet that summarizes the design guidelines. That's quick and easy access for folks.
And also, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's going to be consideration for other nominations from a historical district standpoint, and will those districts in their entirety, just not like designating the Wheeler Street district. We really would like to know in detail how many streets will be involved in a nomination, so people get a better understanding of what the involvement would be from a property standpoint or a neighborhood standpoint.
Well, that's this survey. You're speaking about a historic survey, which maybe, Graham, you could
I mean,
speak.
the 2016 historic preservation element of the master plan is that identifying document.
Okay.
So all of these areas are identified in that preservation plan element.
Okay, and that's online.
That's
And that's
correct.
online.
And that's also what's shown in the historic inventory interactive map.
Okay.
I think, how many do we have, potential?
I don't know the exact number.
No, there's more. I think there's 13, and there's...
yes, section 6.2
of the plan
this
document.
Document. So you download it. It's available online. Go to page 63. It'll list the identified districts.
And there's also landscapes, parks, municipal parks. It's not just
public
buildings.
facilities.
Oh,
Yeah, there's a number.
Okay. Well, I'm on the Parks and Rec, so we get a little of that as well. Okay. All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anyone else that would like to address? No? Oh,
My name is Safi Matthews, and I spoke last time. And I see that a lot of the things, many of the things that I said are now being considered for the future. For example, addressing all the details that are entailed in making these neighborhoods into historical preservation sites. So I really think that it's a good idea to do it and bring it to the knowledge of everyone who lives in those neighborhoods, and also maybe find a way to get the people that live in the neighborhoods involved in it. So it will come from the neighborhood and not, from the commission. That's the best way to get people, to understand. And as you said, you want to educate people, so that's part of it.
So you're saying the impetus should come from the neighborhood?
Right.
Okay.
Well,
It's certainly easier.
I think I think she's also saying that we need to engage in advance so that there's a certain buy-in and a consensus prior to bringing it to an actual formal adjudication.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
So that
a good
could
point.
be a good idea for everything that you do, whether it's neighborhoods or public buildings or so forth. So if that's going to be the attitude, I think it's going to work out. So I'm not against it, but just because I felt that I didn't know anything about it, I didn't know enough about it to make up my mind whether I like it or not. So in the future, if it can be improved, this part, it will be great.
In the communication.
So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for your comments.
Ta-da.
With that, I think our meeting, if I
Yep. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.